She stood there in court, beside her boss, the man she cheated with, and laughed when I walked in wearing my mechanic uniform. But they didn't know. I'd been preparing for this moment longer than she'd been planning to leave. I'm Graham, a small-town garage owner, and what happened next turned their smirks into silence. The judge didn't just rule in my favor, he restored my dignity. If you've ever been underestimated, or if you've faced betrayal and kept your head high, this story's for you. What would you have done in my place? Let me know in the comments. He wore the same grease-stained jacket every morning, but today, Graham noticed the coffee tasted different, colder, quieter. The garage door creaked as he lifted it just past dawn, the sky still caught between slate blue and reluctant pink. Ashland in early November carried the kind of chill that settled in the bones, not the skin. Graham breathed in the crisp air as if it would fill something hollow. The bench outside the garage, once shared with Lila on slow Saturdays, sat bare and quiet. Now that he thought of it, maybe it always had room for just one, and always did. The old space heater hummed to life near the office. Graham flipped the open sign without looking. His hands moved on instinct, rolling the toolbox over, pulling a rag from his back pocket, raising the hood of a client's Buick without a sound. He let the rhythm of tuning an engine fill the silence that had followed him like a fog these past few months. A part of him found comfort in this, spark plugs and belts never lied to him. An hour into his work, the familiar shuffle of orthopedic saws sounded behind him. Norma Blackwood, bundled in a wool coat 2 sizes too big, carried a cardboard tray with 2 steaming mugs and a paper bag cradled like an offering. "Don't worry, I didn't bake these myself," she teased, setting everything down on the office desk. "Marla from the church ladies' circle. But I did bring you that pumpkin blend you like. Strong, no sugar." Graham offered a tired smile, wiping his hands on a towel before reaching for the mug. "Tastes different today." Norma sat across from him in the office, removing her gloves with slow fingers. "Well, mornings without laughter tend to water down everything. Even coffee." The two sat in easy silence as the garage warmed. The radio, tuned low, played something orchestral. On the wall, beside faded certificates and a framed Detroit Tigers cap, hung a sun-bleached photo. Graham and Lila on their wedding day. She wore a blue dress, not white, said she didn't believe in fairy tales, but her smile told a different story. They stood in front of the garage, newly painted back then. Graham looked proud. Younger. Lighter. Leo stepped in from the back shop, wiping grease from his fingers. "Hey, Mr. P, this carburetor's giving me attitude." Then he paused, squinting at the photo. "That you and Mrs. Porter?" Graham nodded once, then turned back to his paperwork. "Long time ago." After Leo disappeared, Norma leaned in, whispering, "You still keep that mug with the engraving?" Graham didn't answer. He didn't need to. The mug sat near the coffee maker in the corner, its letters faded, Lila and Graham, 1993. He picked it up, thumb tracing the groove, as if it might stir something clearer than what clouded his mind now. The day passed with the quiet efficiency that only grief could choreograph. No outbursts. No pacing. Just wrenches and bolts and thoughts that came and went like cold wind through a cracked window. When the sun dipped behind the trees, Graham locked up and walked the short distance to his house next door. The porch light flickered, needed a new bulb. He reached for the knob and noticed it turned too easily. Inside, everything looked untouched, yet too pristine. The scent of citrus cleaner still hung in the air. His boots clicked softly on the linoleum. Then he saw it. A single white envelope on the kitchen table, beside the ceramic mug. His name, Graham, written in Lila's tight, angled script. He sat down slowly, removing his jacket as if each movement required conscious approval. The chair creaked beneath him. He wiped his hands on a napkin without realizing, leaving faint streaks of oil behind. He opened the envelope. 1 page. No greeting. No signature. Just a preliminary petition for divorce, filed with the Ashland County Clerk, date stamped 3 days ago. The radio on the counter played Moon River, crackling through static. Graham sat still. No sigh, no tears. He folded the page once, then again. Slipped it back into the envelope, placed it beside the mug. Norma must have sensed it. Maybe the porch light caught her attention. Maybe intuition was a muscle that aged well in women like her. She knocked once, gently, before opening the door. She didn't even look me in the eye, he muttered, as Norma gently shut the door behind her. The scarf Lila left behind smelled faintly of cologne, expensive, not his. Graham noticed it as he picked the scarf off the back of the dining chair, the fabric delicate against his calloused fingers. The scent clung to the fibers in a way that didn't belong in their house, not amidst the lingering smell of oil, coffee, and fading memories. He held it up to his face, hesitated, then folded it carefully and placed it in the drawer next to the old placemats they hadn't used in years. Norma's voice echoed faintly in his mind. Grief walks in wearing silence. He hadn't understood her words completely yesterday. But now the silence had a shape. And a smell. It was midweek, and the rain had begun before sunrise, a soft drizzle that painted the streets in mirrored reflections of traffic lights and neon signs. Graham arrived at the shop early, as always, though he hadn't slept well. The silence of the house now felt like a presence, not a void. The heater clicked to life in the garage as he poured himself a cup of stale coffee from the thermos he hadn't bothered to clean out since Monday. Leo showed up late, hair damp, holding a breakfast sandwich in one hand and a folded newspaper in the other. "Morning," he muttered, setting the food down on the workbench. "You all right, boss?" he asked after a long pause, watching Graham move through his tasks with even more economy than usual. Graham tightened a bolt on the lift with extra care. "You ever look at someone and wonder when they stop seeing you?" Leo blinked, unsure if it was rhetorical. "You mean, like, changed how they look at you?" "Not just changed," Graham said quietly, "erased." After Leo headed to the back to work on a tire alignment, Graham sat down at his desk and opened the center drawer. Buried beneath old invoices and a rusted pair of keys was a yellow notepad he hadn't touched in years. He flipped it open and wrote slowly, deliberately. Thursday, November 3rd. Bistro Bellamy, receipt for 2. Lila said, client dinner. He clipped the receipt he'd found in the laundry basket next to the note. It had been tucked inside her coat pocket, folded in half. A quiet detail, easily missed. But Lila rarely kept receipts, she hated paper clutter. Graham had stared at the name of the restaurant for a full minute before realizing it was one of the more upscale places in town. The kind with fixed price menus and no parking signs out front. They'd never eaten there. Later that morning, while Graham replaced a worn serpentine belt, his phone buzzed on the bench. He wiped his hands and picked it up. A name flashed across the screen, Jenny. "Hey," he said, trying to keep his voice level. "Hey, Graham." I wasn't sure if I should call," Jenny began, her tone careful. "But I think you should know something." He waited. "It's about Lila. I mean, I don't know for sure, but people at her office talk. And lately, she's been close to someone. Her boss. Travis Monroe." Graham said nothing. "I mean, she never said anything to me directly, but there were photos from some company retreat. And the way she talked about him, always praising, always laughing. I just thought you'd want to know." He thanked her and hung up, sitting in stillness for a moment. The rain outside had shifted from mist to thin needles against the window. Travis. The name barely meant anything, yet it instantly carried weight. That evening, after Leo left and the garage closed, Graham drove slowly through town. Ashland was quiet after dark. Christmas lights blinked half-heartedly on a few porches despite it only being early November. He pulled up near the Ashland office plaza where Lila's firm occupied the top floor. The building's windows glowed faintly, warm in the dark. He stayed in the truck, engine off, windshield wipers squeaking. At 8:43 p.m., he saw her. Lila, laughing as she stepped out of the building, holding an umbrella over her head. Beside her walked a man, tall, clean-shaven, dark suit. Polished. They paused under the awning, just for a moment, before walking side by side to a sleek silver sedan. The man opened the door for her. Graham didn't reach for his phone. He didn't take a photo. He simply watched. And then, as the car pulled away, he memorized the license plate. Back home, he peeled off his damp jacket and reheated old coffee on the stove. The steam curled weakly, and he stood at the kitchen counter sipping it without tasting. The clock ticked past 10. The silence hung heavy. Then his phone vibrated on the table. "Lila, I think we both need space to grow. Please don't make this harder." Graham read the message twice. Saved it. Then slowly placed the phone face down. He didn't reply. Didn't throw the phone. Didn't cry. Instead, he walked into the garage, opened the drawer with the yellow notepad, and wrote. November 9th, message from Lila. "We need space. Confirmed, Travis Monroe." License plate noted. He closed the notebook. The rain had stopped, but the streets were still wet. Graham saved the message silently, then whispered, "Harder than watching you disappear one Thursday at a time?" She only smiled once that morning, when she saw him walk into court wearing his shop uniform. The morning air outside Ashland County Courthouse bit through the layers of Graham's jacket. A gray sky stretched overhead, holding back snow but threatening it. Locals gathered along the courthouse steps, murmuring behind coffee cups, their breath mingling in puffs that hung like quiet judgment. Graham stood alone, holding a simple manila folder close to his chest, its edges softened from months of quiet preparation. He didn't shift his weight. Didn't check his watch. Just waited. Across the street, a black sedan pulled into the lot. Lila stepped out first, heels clicking confidently against the pavement. Her coat was new, he could tell by the way it still held its crease, and her smile flickered briefly as she adjusted a silk scarf. Travis followed behind her, a step too close, smoothing his tie and scanning the crowd with practiced detachment. Marcy Taylor, younger than either of them and pulsing with courtroom ambition, met them at the curb, shaking Lila's hand like they were sealing a victory before it began. Inside, the courthouse smelled of old varnish and reheated vending machine coffee. Fluorescent lights buzzed faintly above. Graham took a seat on the wooden bench near the courtroom door. He rested the folder on his lap and waited. He looked every bit the part they wanted him to look, grease on his boots, name patch stitched on his chest, sleeves pushed to the elbows. But his eyes stayed sharp. Still. A courthouse clerk paused mid-step and did a double take. "You're that Porter guy, right? Fixed my Buick last spring when no one else would touch it." Graham nodded with a small smile. "Still runs okay?" "Better than ever," she whispered, then added, "Didn't expect to see you here." "Neither did I," he said. Courtroom 2B opened its heavy doors at precisely 9 a.m. Judge Halloran presided, an older man with a gaze like steel wool and hands that didn't seem to move unless necessary. He nodded once to the bailiff and glanced toward the attorneys. Marcy rose with bright energy. "Your Honor, my client, Mrs. Lila Porter, seeks a fair and expedited dissolution of this marriage. After decades of stagnation, she's taken the brave step of reclaiming her future." Graham said nothing. He kept his eyes fixed on the judge, who offered no response. Marcy continued, laying out a series of carefully chosen phrases: lack of emotional investment, professional mismatch, aspirational gap. When she said, "Mr. Porter still wears a jumpsuit to court," she didn't even bother disguising the smirk. "Lila deserves more," she declared. Graham didn't flinch. He noticed Lila glance sideways when he didn't react. That had always unnerved her. Harlan Reese, sitting next to Graham, slowly stood. He was a man of few words and fewer gestures. "We reserve our full statement for formal hearing, Your Honor," he said mildly. "However, we contest the completeness of the financial disclosures submitted by the petitioner. We request time to enter supplemental exhibits and present additional witnesses." Judge Halloran raised an eyebrow. "Do you have those exhibits with you?" Harlan tapped the folder still resting on Graham's lap. "Some, yes. Others are forthcoming." Marcy leaned toward the bench. Your Honor, we believe this is an attempt to delay proceedings. Judge Halloran held up a finger. And yet I haven't ruled. So let's not assume. Lila sat upright, but her fingers tapped nervously against the side of her chair. Travis whispered something under his breath and chuckled. Graham caught it. This'll be easier than I thought, Travis murmured, not knowing Graham had heard every syllable. But Graham only nodded slightly, never taking his eyes off the judge. Outside, during the recess, a local reporter snapped a photo of Graham stepping into the hallway. The flash wasn't blinding, but the recognition was. Graham turned his head just enough to avoid being fully framed. He didn't want to be a symbol. Not yet. He stood by the vending machines, pouring lukewarm coffee into the dented thermos he still carried, same one Lila gave him years ago when the garage first opened. The den had been from the day she dropped it rushing out the door, late for a lunch with Travis's team. At the time, it was just a rush, just a bump. Now it seemed like prophecy pressed into steel. Back in the courtroom, the judge reset the date for a second hearing. Harlan gathered his notes calmly. As the room cleared, Graham remained seated for a moment. He stared straight ahead. Lila and Travis passed by, talking low, confident in their momentary win. Harlan adjusted his cuffs, eyes steady. Rough day, he said gently. Graham breathed in through his nose, his voice even. Let them laugh, Graham tells Harlan, eyes forward. They haven't read what's in my folder yet. They thought he'd just show up and lose. What they didn't know was he'd been preparing for this day long before she ever packed her bags. The wind rattled the side door of the garage, a steady tapping like someone knocking and waiting for an answer that would never come. Inside, the small office was dimly lit by a single lamp perched on the desk's corner. Its amber glow softened the worn pages of file folders spread neatly across the surface. Outside, Ashland's town square shimmered with early Christmas lights, white and gold against the late November dusk, swaying slightly in the cold breeze. Graham sat still, sleeves rolled to the forearm, pencil in hand. No grease on his fingers tonight. The manila folder labeled Porter vs. Porter sat open before him. Pages of printouts, itemized ledgers, timelines. Dates in one column, transactions in another. His handwriting filled the margins, small, deliberate, quiet. The office radio played Moon River on a low setting, barely louder than the rustle of paper. The same song had played the morning he found the divorce petition. Back then, it felt like an elegy. Tonight, it was just background music. He was past mourning. A soft knock interrupted the rhythm. It's open, he said without looking up. Norma stepped inside, arms full, Tupperware of homemade chili, 2 ceramic bowls wrapped in a dish towel, and a thermos that clinked faintly. You look like you could use something hot that didn't come from a machine, she said, setting everything down gently. Figured you weren't eating again. Graham glanced up, offering a tired smile. Smells like real food. That's already a step up. She ladled chili into the bowls without asking. You keep sitting in this cold room with those papers like they're going to talk back. They already have, he said, tapping the corner of one document. Lila never noticed I refinanced the house last year. Lowered the rate, took her father's name off the loan. She didn't ask about the paperwork, so I didn't offer. Norma handed him a bowl, then sat in the chair across from him, pulling her coat tighter. My husband's betrayal was loud. There were slammed doors, broken dishes, the neighbors knew before I did. Yours, she paused. It's cold. And cold leaves a scar, too. Graham sipped from the spoon slowly, then set the bowl aside. Silence gives you time. Anger takes it away. They sat in companionable quiet for a while, the only sound the occasional creak of the wind nudging the building. Later, Leo arrived, slightly out of breath and carrying a small box of blank flash drives. Got what you needed, Mr. P, he said, placing the box beside the files. Want me to help with scanning? Graham nodded. Start with the bank statements. Red tabs. As the printer hummed, Leo hesitated. Why not just fight back? I mean, really fight. Drag her through court. Make it hurt. Graham didn't look up right away. When he did, his eyes were calm. Because if I shout, I become what they say I am. If I stand still, I become what I know I am. Leo nodded slowly, then went back to scanning. The office phone rang at 9:03 p.m. Harlan, Graham answered. I've reviewed everything, came the attorney's steady voice. The records. The transfers. The dates. They have no idea what's coming. Graham closed the file he'd been reviewing, the soft snap of the folder's cover loud in the quiet. He looked toward the wood stove in the corner, long dormant, then stood and opened its iron door. He placed a few logs inside, struck a match, and watched the flame catch. First fire since Lila left. Norma stood, folding the dish towel. You coming to the community Thanksgiving next week? You always brought the green bean casserole. He shook his head. Not this year. She didn't press. Just touched his shoulder lightly and left. The fire crackled low as Graham returned to his seat. He adjusted the edge of a document until it lined up perfectly. Then he reached for the thickest folder on the table, read the label once, Porter versus Porter, and slid it closed. Let's see if silence can win a war. When the truth came out, it didn't roar, it settled into the courtroom like snowfall, slow and undeniable. The sky above Ashland that morning was the kind of gray that dulled the edges of buildings and made every breath feel heavy. Thanksgiving was just days away, and the town square was already draped in muted colors and wreaths. But no one was thinking about turkeys or football. They were thinking about what was about to unfold in courtroom B. The steps of the courthouse buzzed with quiet speculation. A handful of locals stood with gloved hands around paper coffee cups, pretending not to watch. Inside, the room was fuller than usual. Not packed, but occupied, by neighbors, former customers, and a few retired schoolteachers who remembered Graham from the PTA. Graham entered without fanfare. His work uniform was clean again. No attempt at disguise. No apology for who he was. Harlan walked beside him, a folder tucked under his arm and a look of calm determination on his face. Lila and Travis sat at their table, her lips pressed into a firm line, his arms folded tightly across his chest. Their lawyer, Marcy, shuffled papers nervously. Judge Halloran surveyed the room like a man choosing which thread to pull first. Harlan stood and nodded respectfully. Your Honor, we'd like to begin by submitting a series of documents, financial records, account statements, vehicle GPS logs, and text message exchanges, all pertaining to the events and claims made by Mrs. Porter and Mr. Monroe. Halloran motioned for him to proceed. The screen beside the judge flickered on. A slideshow began, receipts from Trattoria Venti, all dated Thursdays, nights Lila had claimed client emergencies. Calendar discrepancies showed her out-of-office logs from work did not match what she told Graham. Text messages painted a clearer picture, too familiar, too frequent. Then came the joint account withdrawals, substantial amounts quietly moved into a new account under Lila's name. Marcy tried to object, but her voice faltered. And one more, Harlan added. He played a short audio clip. A man's voice, Travis's father, low and smooth. Come on, Graham. Give her the house. You're just a mechanic. Don't make this hard for everyone. There was a pause in the room. You could hear the hum of the old overhead lights. Then Harlan nodded toward the back. A tall, slightly stooped man rose. Walter Hensley. The court calls Walter Hensley, Harlan announced. Judge Halloran squinted. The retired janitor from Ashland Elementary? Yes, Your Honor. Walter approached the stand slowly but without hesitation. His hands trembled, but his voice was firm. I don't know legal things, he began, but I know decency. For 20 years, Graham Porter fixed our school van. Every winter. Even when we couldn't pay. Even when his wife told him not to waste his time. He did it anyway. He paused. Looked directly at Lila. Some folks make noise. Some folks show up. The silence in the courtroom this time wasn't awkward. It was respect. Marcy stood but barely found footing. She attempted to redirect, but her papers slipped. Her voice caught. She glanced at Lila for support, but Lila looked away. Then Travis did something no one expected. He spoke. Not quietly, not respectfully. "This is a circus," he snapped, standing. "You're taking the word of some grease monkey and a janitor over." "Mr. Monroe," the judge interrupted, his tone sharp. "You are not a party to this divorce. Sit down." Travis froze, then slowly sank back into his chair, his face red. The courtroom shifted in that moment. A dozen small heads turned toward Graham not with pity, but with quiet recognition. He wasn't a man who had been defeated. He was a man who had endured. Judge Halloran folded his hands. This court respects dignity. And it's clear which side maintained it. He looked to Lila. Then to Graham. The house and garage will remain under Mr. Porter's ownership. Mrs. Porter is granted 3 months of transitional support. No further claims to the business will be considered. The gavel struck once. A breath seemed to escape the room. As people rose and began filing out, Graham stood still. Harlan placed a hand gently on his arm. "Sometimes, the best hammer is the truth," he said. Graham nodded. Outside, Norma stood under the awning, arms crossed against the cold. Her eyes met Graham's, and she gave a small, proud smile. He returned it. As the crowd cleared, Lila leaned toward Travis and hissed through clenched teeth, "You said he'd break." The court didn't cheer, but Graham didn't need it. He'd already won the moment he didn't lose himself. Snow had begun to fall softly over Ashland, dressing the roofs and sidewalks in a hush that reminded Graham of quiet childhood mornings. The kind where you woke to stillness and knew school had been canceled before anyone said a word. He stood in the garage doorway, coffee in hand, watching the flakes land gently on the windshield of a Buick waiting its turn on the lift. Inside, the radio played a familiar tune, Moon River, the notes warmer this time, less like memory and more like presence. He'd been back to work since the hearing. Declined the local paper's request for an interview. Ignored the voicemail from a regional reporter looking for a slice of America divorce story. He had no interest in being anyone's headline. He just wanted to finish the oil change on the Honda Civic in Bay 2 before lunch. Leo peeked his head into the office, wiping his hands on a rag. "So what now, boss?" Graham looked up from the parts order sheet. "We keep fixing things," he said. "That's what we do." Leo nodded like that answer settled something deep. Later that afternoon, Norma dropped by with a container of something that smelled suspiciously like sweet potato casserole. "It's for the church dinner," she explained. "But I always make a little extra for those who pretend they're too busy to come." Graham raised an eyebrow. "You've been talking to my conscience again?" "Nope. Just your neighbor. Though he's getting wiser." He chuckled, setting the container carefully in the fridge. "I appreciate it. They're setting up now at the Methodist Hall. Potluck. No judgment, just food and folding chairs." "I'm not sure," he began. She interrupted gently. "Come late, if you have to. But come." The garage closed early. Snow picked up just enough to dust the sidewalks but not to stick. The kind of snow people in Ashland called polite. Graham changed into a clean flannel shirt, grabbed his coat, and stood by the garage door for a long minute before flipping the lights off. When he walked into the church hall, it was already half full. Laughter drifted from the far table where the town librarian was telling a story with wide gestures. Folding chairs scraped against tile. Someone carried in a slow cooker of baked beans. A long table held pumpkin pies and mashed potatoes in mismatched bowls. Graham stepped inside quietly. People saw him, but they didn't stare. They nodded. A few gave small handshakes. Walter Hensley waved from across the room and stood slowly. His granddaughter, maybe 8 or 9, approached Graham shyly and held out a folded piece of construction paper. He opened it carefully. Inside, a crayon drawing of a man in a blue uniform with a big wrench and a cape. "Thank you for helping Grandpa. You're a garage hero." He swallowed once, folded the card slowly, and slipped it into his coat pocket. Norma appeared beside him with 2 paper plates. "I saved you the good rolls. Sit." They ate without needing to talk. Just the murmur of town voices around them, and the scent of cinnamon and cornbread in the air. "You came back stronger," she said at last. "But more than that, you came back kind." Graham didn't respond right away. He just looked around the room. The warmth of it. The way people held doors, passed napkins, made space. It wasn't fanfare. It was enough. As the potluck wrapped up and chairs were folded, Graham stood by the coat rack and jingled his keys. He turned to Leo, who was finishing a conversation with someone from the hardware store. "Hey," Graham called. "Catch." Leo turned just in time to snatch the shop keys out of the air. "You'll run it Monday," Graham said. "I'm sleeping in. First time in years." Leo blinked. "You serious?" "Dead serious." Outside, the snow had thickened, each flake finding its way to earth without hurry. Graham walked home through the quiet, hands in his pockets, breath misting gently ahead of him. At the porch, he paused. The house stood still in the snowlight, its windows glowing with warmth. He looked at the door, then the roofline dusted in white, and said quietly, "This house is mine. Because I stayed." Inside, the old radio clicked on, and Moon River played again. This time, it sounded like peace. And if anyone had been close enough to hear, they might have caught the softest echo of something else, floating through the quiet. You don't need to raise your voice when you've already raised your character. In the quiet falling of snow and the hush of a town returning to routine, Graham found peace not through applause, but through the steady beat of his own quiet dignity. He hadn't shouted, hadn't sought revenge, he had simply stood his ground, repaired what was his, and refused to be undone by betrayal. Sometimes, the strongest victories aren't loud, they're earned in silence, in restraint, in the decision to rise without bitterness. Like the steady hum of a garage late at night, character doesn't need to speak to be heard. If this story touched something true in you, consider offering quiet strength to someone who needs it, because kindness, like dignity, never fades.